largest army Europe has ever seen, is about to collide with a force no one saw coming.
And only one will survive the dawn.
Darkness trembles beneath the weight of hooves, not the sound of a single rider, but thousands, an ocean of horses pounding against the earth so violently that the ground itself seems to pulse like a living heart under unbearable strain. Steel catches the first pale hint of dawn, flashing in jagged strokes across a horizon swallowed by storm clouds and smoke. And for one breathless moment, it feels as though the world is holding itself still, waiting to see which civilization will shatter first. The scream that breaks the silence isn't human. It's the shrill, cutting cry of a signal horn rising from the mist-shrouded cliffs outside Vienna, a sound meant to carry across battlefield and city walls alike. I can almost smell the cold metal of that horn, taste the fear it spreads through men who haven't slept in days. They sense what's coming. They feel it in their bones. For nearly 2 months, Vienna has been choking under the grip of a siege that was never supposed to reach this point, and now everything teeters on the edge of obliteration. The stakes are not whispers here. They roar. If Vienna falls, the road beyond it stands naked, nothing to stop the Ottoman Empire from sweeping deep into Central Europe. A chain reaction of collapsing kingdoms, broken alliances, and all the soft, trembling certainties people cling to as civilization. It isn't just a city under threat, it's a world order balanced on a blade's edge. And as the smoke curls against the wind, I feel the weight of what the defenders did not yet know, that the force descending upon them was larger, more experienced, and more determined than any they had ever faced. Kara Mustafa Pasha didn't come to negotiate. He came to erase, but somewhere beyond the ridgelines, hidden behind trees and mountain passes, something is moving. Something no one in the Ottoman camp has fully grasped. A counterforce gathering strength in silence. A coalition of kingdoms that should have broken under their own rivalries, yet somehow, almost impossibly, have chosen to stand together. And at its center rides a king whose very name will soon ignite both hope and terror. Jan III Sobieski is pushing his exhausted men forward, clinging to the desperate belief that he isn't too late. What he doesn't know yet, what no one knows, is that there is a single moment approaching, a decision point so small it might go unnoticed. But that moment will decide whether Vienna survives the day or becomes the epicenter of a rewritten Europe. Kara Mustafa stands in his grand pavilion, silk walls billowing like the lungs of a giant beast, maps sprawled across a low table, coffee steaming beside him. His eyes, cold, calculating, follow every line of the approaching hills. He senses pressure building, like a tightening fist around his army, but he refuses to acknowledge it. He has sent messengers back to the Sultan boasting of the city's imminent fall. Retreat would mean humiliation. And humiliation, in his world, means a rope tightened around one's neck. So he convinces himself that no relief force could possibly arrive in time. No Christian coalition could march with the speed necessary to save a dying city. But the faint rumble he hears in the distance tells a different story. Inside the starving city, defenders cling to their posts like shadows etched into stone. I can feel their desperation as they run their fingers along cracked walls, their nails scraping mortar that crumbles like old bread. They have buried their dead in silence. They have patched breaches with debris and corpses. Their last cannonballs are being melted into makeshift ammunition. And when the sky thunders again, many of them look upward not with hope, but with the quiet expectation that this is simply how the end begins. Yet this is not the end. Not yet. Because beyond those mountains, the relief army is splitting into columns, each footfall sending tremors through the ground. And leading them, Sobieski carries a vision, burning bright, sharp, and unyielding. He sees Vienna not as a city, but as the beating heart of a world that cannot afford to stop. He knows what failure looks like. He has lived it. He has seen his homeland trampled by invaders, watched men die because uniformed fools made decisions with pride, not strategy. And so he rides with a fury that pushes his men harder than any general should dare. But he has no choice, not when the city's fate depends on a matter of hours. As the sun begins to rise, streaking the sky with a blood-colored glow, Vienna's walls groan under another bombardment. Smoke pours from shattered rooftops, drifting into the narrow streets where civilians huddle in cellars, breathing dirt and prayers. Mothers hold their children close, whispering stories of saints and salvation. Men with trembling hands sharpen knives because there is nothing else left to sharpen. Every breath tastes like dust and fear. But on the ridgeline above them, something shifts. The wind carries a new sound. Not Ottoman drums, not the hissing arc of mortar shells. Something else, something deeper, the low rolling thunder of cavalry moving through the woods, and suddenly everything accelerates. Kara Mustafa's scouts rush into camp, breathless, insisting that a massive force is approaching. The Grand Vizier dismisses them at first, waving a hand as though brushing away a fly. He has heard rumors for weeks and none have materialized. But then he steps outside and his eyes narrow. Dust clouds rise from the hills. Birds take flight in great spiraling flocks. The earth quivers beneath his feet. And in that moment he realizes this is not rumor. This is not imagination. This is a storm. Sobieski's vanguard emerges from the forest like ghosts materializing from the edge of the world. Poles, Austrians, Bavarians, Saxons. An unlikely alliance forged by desperation. They march together despite old wounds and ancient rivalries. Their armor gleams beneath the rising sun, battered but unbroken, and they carry with them the single unshakable conviction that Vienna must not fall, what no one sees yet, and what sends a chill through my chest as if I'm standing there myself, is the shape forming behind the vanguard, a line of cavalry stretching far beyond the hills, the hussars, Sobieski's elite, men whose charge will soon become the largest cavalry charge in recorded history, men whose wings, those iconic wooden frames adorned with feathers, will scream through the air with a sound that some Ottoman survivors would later swear came from angels or demons, but that moment is still hours away. For now, the armies are positioning themselves like pieces on a board, each move scraping closer to a collision that will permanently scar the earth beneath them. Inside Vienna, a guard on the battered walls sees a flash of light on the horizon. He blinks, thinking it a trick of the smoke. Then another flash. And another. His heart stutters. He grips the stone parapet with both hands, and he whispers a single word, one that spreads like wildfire through the city. Reinforcements. But he doesn't know the truth. None of them do. Reinforcements don't guarantee survival. They only guarantee that the final battle will be even more brutal, more chaotic, and more decisive than anything that has come before. And as dawn unfurls across the battlefield like a blood-soaked banner, I feel the tension pulling tighter, the narrative thread twisting into something sharp and inevitable, because Vienna is no longer simply under siege. Vienna is standing at the threshold of its resurrection, or its annihilation. And what happens next will depend not on brute strength, not on numbers, but on the razor-thin decisions of men who, at this very moment, cannot fathom how their next breath will alter the course of history. The morning air tightens as though the world itself is holding its breath, waiting for the first move in a battle that will decide more than land or glory. Kara Mustafa steps through the rows of Ottoman tents, hands clasped behind his back, robe brushing against the dust like the whisper of a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. His soldiers straighten as he passes, though many avert their eyes, sensing a storm gathering behind the calm mask of their commander. He hears murmurs, reports from scouts he wishes were lies, yet he refuses to betray any weakness. Pride is a chain around his neck, invisible but unbreakable, pulling tighter with every mile the relief. Army advances. He knows the stakes. The Sultan had given him one command: take Vienna, not damage it, not negotiate, take it whole. A city that, in Ottoman vision, should become a jewel shining beneath the crescent. But the city refuses to die. Every day the defenders rebuilt what the artillery tore down, like ants dragging stones back into place after a predator's foot comes crashing through their home. It infuriated him. It humiliated him. And now, after all of this, the relief force dares approach at the very last hour, threatening to rip his victory from his hands. Yet he clings to the belief that he still has time to crush Vienna before the coalition fully assembles on the hills. And so he sends fresh waves toward the battered walls, drums pounding in frantic rhythm, the air trembling with the cries of men driven to fight on empty stomachs, their bodies worn thin by weeks of assault. Smoke rises in thick curtains from the trenches, carrying the stench of sweat, blood, and damp earth. And somewhere among the cries a faint echo lingers, fear, quiet but present, threading through the ranks like an infection. Inside Vienna, the defenders brace themselves. I feel the raw weight of their exhaustion, the tremor in their fingers as they notch arrows or load muskets with trembling hands. They've survived on dwindling food, stale water, and sheer willpower. Many of them have lost friends in the night assaults, dragged off by Ottoman sappers tunneling beneath the ground. The walls around them are open wounds patched with whatever rubble they can carry. But now hope flickers, fragile yet undeniable, as word spreads that a relief army has been sighted. It's not a triumphant cheer that passes through Vienna, it's a shiver, a whisper that feels almost unreal. Because hope, after so much suffering, is dangerous, it makes the heart vulnerable. And when the defenders look to the hills, squinting through smoke and tears, they see shapes forming, banners rising, glints of sunlight striking armor. But they also know how quickly hope can sharpen into heartbreak. If the relief force fails, the Ottomans will pour into the city with a fury unimaginable. Everyone understands what that would mean. Everyone. Outside the walls, the coalition generals gather in tense council. Sobieski stands among them, taller than most, shoulders broad beneath a coat battered by rain, mud, and sleepless nights. His eyes scan the Ottoman trenches below, reading them like an enemy's confession spilling across the earth. He studies the ridge lines, the routes for cavalry, the weaknesses in the Ottoman encirclement. He sees hesitation in his allies' faces, fear behind forced confidence. And he doesn't blame them. They have marched through forests and mountains, slept little, eaten less. But there is something Sobieski possesses that none of them do: an unwavering clarity about what must be done. He steps closer to the edge of the cliff, wind tugging at his cape, the smell of gunpowder drifting upward from the valley. And in that moment I feel his mind narrowing to a single point. He has one chance. One window to strike with overwhelming force before the Ottomans can fully reposition their artillery. If he misses that window, Vienna dies, Europe trembles, and history carves a different path. But as he charts his plan, something ripples through the trees behind him. A sound, a presence. His elite hussars emerging in disciplined columns, wings rising like skeletal halos behind their backs. The feathers shimmer in the morning light, casting shadows that flicker like living spirits drawn from the old legends. They are more than cavalry, they are a message written in steel and fury, a warning carved across the air. The Polish king has arrived. The coalition troops watch them with quiet awe. Even the seasoned veterans among the Austrians and Bavarians cannot hide it. There is something mythic in their bearing, something that seems to defy the grounded reality of war. And though none of them can yet name it, they sense that these riders will define the day. But Kara Mustafa's preparations are already underway. His officers gather around him, maps unfurled, voices blending into a cacophony of warnings and desperate suggestions. Some plead for a rapid final assault on the city before the relief army can engage. Others argue for repositioning artillery. A few even whisper that a tactical withdrawal might be necessary, something unthinkable in the Grand Vizier's mind. And as they argue, the first Ottoman batteries fire again, shaking the ground with thunderous cracks that tear through the city's battered walls. Debris rains onto courtyards and cellars. Children cry beneath the rubble as dust settles into their lungs. Soldiers drag wounded comrades back from breaches that widen with every strike. Vienna is bleeding, and everyone knows it. Yet something else is happening. Vienna is refusing to die. Every time a section of the wall collapses, defenders spill into the gap, forming living barricades with shields, pikes, and whatever they can lift. They fight not just for their lives, but for the fragile promise glowing on the horizon. Meanwhile, Sobieski's scouts return with grim news. The Ottomans are repositioning, setting traps, fortifying the very hills where the coalition plans to descend. If they wait, if they hesitate, the Ottomans will shape the battlefield into a labyrinth of death. Sobieski sees it clear as day. Delay means defeat. The attack must come soon, sooner than his weary soldiers would prefer. But in his mind, there is no room for doubt. He turns to his commanders, voice low but sharp enough to cleave the tension. He tells them the plains before Vienna are not just terrain, they are destiny. They must commit everything, strike with united force, and shatter the siege before the Ottomans can adapt. Yet, even as he speaks with certainty, a shadow slips across his thoughts, because he knows the sheer scale of what they are facing. The Ottoman camp is massive, its walls of tents stretch farther than any European army had ever imagined possible. Thousands of labourers, cooks, smiths, camels, horses, artillery crews, janissaries, sipahis. A miniature city wrapped in canvas, an entire world brought to crush Vienna beneath its weight. To defeat that world in a single day is a task so enormous it borders on the impossible. But impossible is a word that men like Sobieski treat not as a barrier but as a dare. He prepares the coalition lines, placing infantry along the left flank, Austrians at the centre, and Polish forces poised for the decisive blow. And while he does, he senses something almost supernatural, an energy crackling through the camp, born from the mixture of fear and determination that grips every soldier present. They know the sun will set on triumph or on devastation. Back inside Vienna, the defenders strain their eyes, trying to decipher the movements atop the hills. Some shout to comrades below, claiming they see cavalry forming. Others insist the relief force is too late. Someone begins a prayer, someone else curses. And in the midst of all this, a young soldier grips the hilt of his sword, whispering to himself that he only needs to survive one more day, just one. But none of them understand how much that single day will demand. Kara Mustafa descends into the trenches, observing the front lines with silent intensity. His officers attempt to read his expression, but it reveals nothing. He has always been a master of composure, using silence as a weapon. Yet beneath that stillness, I sense a storm raging. The arrival of the relief army threatens not just his campaign, but his honor, his standing, his life. The Sultan expects victory. Anything less invites punishment far more terrifying than death on a battlefield. He orders soldiers to push harder, to break the city's spirit, before the coalition force can strike. Janissaries surge forward, shields lifted, muskets blazing. Sappers crawl toward weak points with barrels of powder strapped to their backs, ready to tunnel beneath the walls and ignite hell itself. The ground shakes with each explosion. The air becomes thick with smoke and screams. And still Vienna holds. But something changes in the rhythm of battle. The Ottoman drums falter for a moment, just a heartbeat, barely noticeable. Yet that tiny stutter is enough for Sobieski to sense opportunity. He feels the shifting tide as if drawn by instinct, a soldier's intuition honed from decades of war. He studies the valley one last time, the layout of the trenches, the placement of artillery, the exposed flank that Kara Mustafa cannot fully shield because he remains obsessed with the city's final collapse. This is the crack. The narrow seam in an iron fortress. Sobieski turns to his generals and speaks the words they have been waiting for. Prepare for descent. The order spreads like sparks through dry grass. Officers shout commands. Soldiers tighten straps. Horses snort and paw at the ground. The tension rises to a fever pitch, beating like a second heart beneath the roar of distant artillery. And through it all, the hussars stand perfectly still, silent, statuesque, waiting for the moment when the world will erupt. I can feel the weight of history beginning to coil, ready to strike. The armies are aligning, the final movements locking into place. Vienna hangs between survival and oblivion, and neither side yet knows how violently the coming hours will unfold. But the hills are watching. The forests are listening. And the earth itself seems to tremble, aware that the next command will unleash something the world has never seen before. The coalition army begins its descent with a silence so heavy it feels unnatural, as if nature itself is afraid to breathe. Then, slowly, the stillness cracks. Boots grind into soil loosened by the night's dew. Armor rustles. Horses shift weight. The entire hillside becomes a living organism preparing to surge downward in one furious, unified heartbeat. I feel the tension like a weight pressing into my chest, as though I'm standing there myself, waiting for the inevitable plunge. Sobieski moves through his ranks, eyes burning with a clarity that makes even hardened veterans straighten as he passes. He touches a shoulder here, nods to a captain there. Small gestures that ignite fierce loyalty in the men around him. They know the king isn't watching from a distant hilltop. He is here, on the ground, breathing the same dust, facing the same risk. And that presence shapes them, pulls their fear into focus, transforms their trembling into resolve. Below them, the Ottoman lines ripple with activity. Scouts race back to camp, calling to officers, pointing frantically at the shadows forming in the tree line. Janissaries tighten their formations, muskets primed, blades drawn. Artillery crews scramble to pivot cannons toward the heights, their hands moving with frantic speed. Kara Mustafa emerges once more from his tent, head lifting sharply as the wind carries the faint tremor of movement from above. For the first time, his calm expression flickers. Not fear, not yet, but unease. A fracture in his certainty. He ascends a small rise overlooking the battlefield, robes swirling around his legs. Smoke curls upward, framing him in a haze of grey and orange. Distant thunder, not weather, but something heavier, more rhythmic, rolls through the valley. He narrows his eyes. The coalition is moving sooner than he anticipated. Too soon. He expected more debate, more delay, more hesitation from so many kingdoms forced into alliance. Yet the Christians are descending before he has fully repositioned his forces, and that realization slithers through him like a cold serpent. The first volleys erupt as Ottoman artillery fires uphill, cannonballs tearing through branches, exploding in showers of splinters. Soldiers duck behind trees, gripping their weapons tighter. The air fills with the sharp tang of gunpowder, smoke spreading in ghostly layers between the trunks. But Sobieski's forces do not break. They push forward, weaving between explosions, teeth clenched, eyes fixed on the valley below. The Austrians advance in disciplined blocks, shields high, muskets braced. Bavarians push alongside them, grunting with exertion as they drag field pieces into position. The Saxons lag slightly behind, breath ragged from days of relentless marching, but the sight of the approaching battlefield steels their resolve. Together they become a river of steel flowing down the hillside, carving channels through brush and dirt. Then the Ottomans unleash their front lines. Janissaries surge forward, their march a synchronized thunder, white turbans rising and falling like ocean waves. Their muskets flare, sending streaks of fire through the air. The ground trembles beneath their disciplined advance. Their war cries crash against the hills, echoing like the roar of some ancient beast awakened from slumber. And for a moment, the collision seems almost inevitable, two worlds rushing toward each other with such force that the very earth bends under the pressure. But Sobieski is not ready to commit everything. Not yet. He holds his cavalry back, letting the infantry take the brunt of the early clash. He understands the psychology of battle as deeply as he understands tactics. If the Ottomans believe the Christians are leading with their strongest force, they will reinforce too quickly, too aggressively. But if they mistake the coalition infantry for the spearhead of the attack, they will commit resources prematurely, opening a gap only cavalry can exploit. The infantry clash hits with a sound like stone shattering. Steel screams against steel. Muskets discharge at point-blank range, the blasts so loud they seem to tear the sky apart. Men slam into each other with the desperation of animals fighting for the last breath of air. Smoke thickens until faces become silhouettes, figures flickering in and out of visibility like ghosts battling inside a storm. Ottoman cannons pound the hillside, but the coalition pushes forward regardless. Austrians plant pikes into the soil, bracing against the weight of charging Sipahis. Bavarians fire coordinated volleys, the push and pull of battle grinding into something brutal, something primal. The first hour feels like an eternity stretched thin over the valley. Every second a chisel carving deeper into the fate of Europe. Amid the chaos, Kara Mustafa studies the battle with sharp precision. He sees the Christian infantry pressing hard, more aggressively than expected. He sees the coalition making gains in places where he predicted stalemate. But what he does not see, what he fails to see, is the vast cavalry force waiting silently behind the front lines, the hussars hidden in the forests, the massed riders still untouched by the fury below. His miscalculation tightens around his campaign like a noose. Inside Vienna, the defenders cling to their walls, watching smoke rise from the fields beyond. They see flashes, muskets firing, lines advancing, figures falling. The noise rolls over the city in waves, shaking shattered glass from windows, sending tremors through the stone foundations of homes already cracked by weeks of bombardment. For every Viennese watching from the battlements, time distorts, stretching between hope and dread. Some mutter prayers. Others grip weapons tighter, refusing to surrender the city, even if the relief force fails. A young lieutenant on the northern wall wipes grime from his face and squints at the battlefield. He sees the Christian infantry locked in brutal combat. He sees Ottoman cavalry wheeling to flank them, and he feels something cold settle in his chest. From this distance, the coalition appears outnumbered, outpositioned, and dangerously stretched. He doesn't know the intricacies of the enemy's lines. He doesn't know the plan. He only knows that what he's seeing looks like a knife edge between victory and catastrophe. And that edge is tilting. But the king atop the ridge sees more. Sobieski watches the battle unfold with a strategist's eye, noting every weakness revealed in Ottoman movements. He sees the left flank thinning as Kara Mustafa commits more troops toward the center. He sees artillery struggling to reposition. He sees chaos rippling through the Ottoman camps as laborers, cooks, and auxiliary troops scramble in panic, unsure whether to flee or fight. He feels the moment approaching, and when it comes, it's almost instinct. A shift in wind direction that clears the smoke, a gap in the lines widening by a step too many. A hesitation, a brief but priceless hesitation in the Ottoman center as orders become tangled in the noise of battle. Sobieski raises his hand. Hussars lower their lances as one, the forest behind them trembling under the weight of thousands of hooves shifting forward. Feathers mounted on their wings rustle like the whispering of spirits disturbed by the living. The horses paw the earth, eager, sensing the tide about to break, and the king's voice, low and controlled, carries through the ranks. Not yet. He wants the gap wider. He wants the Ottomans deeper in confusion. He wants Kara Mustafa to remain blind for a few more minutes. Below, chaos deepens. Coalition infantry push forward again, catching the Ottomans off guard. Bavarian officers shout themselves hoarse, trying to hold the line. Austrians lose ground in one sector, gain it in another. Janissaries press harder, their discipline unyielding as they try to overwhelm the Christians before the tide can turn fully against them. The battlefield becomes a tapestry of movement, men surging, falling, rising again, blades flashing through clouds of smoke. Cannon fire rattles teeth and shakes the breath from lungs. Horses rear, soldiers scream, powder ignites in bursts of light bright enough to blind. The world narrows to the crush of bodies, the scrape of metal, the heat of battle amplified by fear and fury. And then, somewhere in the haze, a signal horn sounds not from the Ottomans, but from the coalition side. A deep, resonant call that rolls across the hills like a promise. Sobieski turns his horse toward his cavalry. His expression shifts not to rage, not to frenzy, but to absolute certainty. He reaches into the air, fingers cutting through the morning light, and gives the command that will alter the fate of Europe forever. The hussars begin to move. Not a charge yet, just a forward motion, a rippling advance as the entire cavalry mass flows out of the tree line. Ottoman soldiers see shapes emerging on the ridgeline, silhouettes growing larger with every heartbeat. Some squint, unable to comprehend what they're witnessing. Others shout warnings that are swallowed by the din of battle. The winged riders gather speed, dust rising beneath them in a billowing cloud. And the Ottomans still do not understand. Not until Sobieski lifts his hand again. Not until he draws a breath deep enough to still the trembling air. Not until he unleashes a command that tears through the battlefield like thunder breaking stone. And the hussars plunge forward. The charge begins not with noise, but with pressure, an invisible force swelling behind the hussars as thousands of hooves strike the earth in perfect unison, each impact a drumbeat summoning the storm. For an instant, time seems to stretch thin, the world caught in a moment of suspended breath as those magnificent riders gather speed, their wings slicing the wind with a rising hiss that could belong to angels descending or demons riding into judgment. And then the silence shatters. The hill erupts. Horses thunder down the slope with ferocity so overwhelming that even seasoned soldiers feel their knees weaken. Dust billows behind them like the wake of a giant wave crashing toward the valley. Sunlight glints off lances angled forward, their steel tips glowing like shards of captured lightning. The ground vibrates beneath their weight, a trembling that runs through soil, through stone, through bone itself. I feel that vibration in my own teeth, as if the past is shaking the present to announce its arrival. From below, the Ottoman soldiers stare upward, unable to look away. Some begin to shout. Some freeze. A few drop their weapons entirely, realizing too late what is coming. This is not a cavalry charge, this is a force of nature, a wall of thunder given form and fury. Kara Mustafa's officers scream orders to redirect the lines, but their voices are lost in the rising storm. The Janissaries brace themselves instinctively, shields up, rifles ready. Yet even they, pride of the empire, veterans of countless battles, feel something close to dread gripping their chests. Sobieski rides at the head of the formation, his armor reflecting the sun, his cape whipping back like a banner pulled by destiny itself. He doesn't shout, he doesn't roar. His focus is absolute, his grip steady, his mind narrowed to a single purpose: break the Ottoman center in one decisive blow. He knows the charge must be perfect, unbroken, relentless. A single hesitation, a single crack in formation could unravel everything. But his men do not hesitate. They have trained for this moment all their lives. They were born to unleash this storm. As they descend, their speed multiplies. 20 kilometers per hour, 30, now 40. The force behind their lances climbs into something terrifying: 300 pounds of rider, armor, and horse, accelerating into spears driven by unstoppable momentum. A single hussar hitting a line of infantry is devastating. Thousands striking at once, devastation becomes annihilation. The Ottomans fire their muskets, the first volley erupting in flashes of fire and smoke. Bullets punch into armor, tear into flesh, topple horses, men fall. But the charge does not slow. The riders thunder onward, crushing the distance in heartbeats. A second volley fires, but now the hussars are too close, too fast, too overwhelming to stop. And then the impact hits. It sounds like the earth breaking open beneath a divine hammer. Lances shatter against shields, splintering into fragments that whirl through the air like deadly shards. Bodies are thrown backward, trampled under hooves that do not pause for anything. Shockwaves ripple outward as the formation smashes through the first Ottoman ranks, tearing lines apart as easily as cloth ripping under strain. Janissaries collide with horses, spears bending, armor buckling, cries swallowed by the thunder. The Ottoman center begins to fold. Not in orderly retreat, but in chaos, men stumbling over each other, commanders shouting contradictory orders, the neat formations dissolving into desperate clusters. The hussars burst through them like a blade through silk, carving a gaping wound in the heart of the Ottoman formation. Dust and screams spiral into the air, mixing with the metallic scent of blood and the choking burn of smoke. Yet the riders do not stop. They press deeper, turning a breach into a crater, tearing the battlefield open with sheer kinetic fury. Behind them, more cavalry surges forward. The German and Austrian riders hammer into the flanks, tightening the pressure on the collapsing lines. The hillside becomes a cascade of steel cascading down upon stunned defenders. Austrian infantry rally behind the charge, surging forward with renewed strength as they see Ottoman lines faltering under the overwhelming force. Sobieski breaks through the first wave and finds himself staring at a mass of Ottoman soldiers desperately trying to regroup. He raises his sword high, the blade catching sunlight with a brilliance that freezes the moment into something almost mythic. He drives forward again, leading his men into the heart of the enemy camp. His roar, wordless and fierce, carries above the chaos like the cry of a king carved from iron. Inside the Ottoman camp, pandemonium erupts. Servants flee in terror, running between tents as their world collapses around them. Camels bray and break loose from their tethers, crashing through supply stations. The smell of spilled grain mixes with the acrid sting of gunpowder. Tents catch fire as stray sparks fall into cloth. The camp, once an organized war machine, now becomes a labyrinth of fear. And Kara Mustafa watches it unfold with a dawning horror he cannot mask. He stands rigid, eyes wide, jaw tightening until it trembles. This was not supposed to happen. The Christians were not supposed to strike with such unity, such speed, such devastating power. His plan had been to outlast Vienna, crush it into surrender before any European force could assemble. But now the assault on the city stalls as panic spreads among the Ottoman front lines. Officers are torn between orders: press the siege or turn to face the cavalry. The conflict freezes them in indecision. The Janissary commanders shout for reinforcements, but many units cannot reach the front, their paths blocked by fleeing auxiliaries and stampeding animals. The great Ottoman war machine, so vast in scale it defies imagination, chokes on its own size. Vienna's defenders see the shift. They hear the roars of cavalry striking deep into the Ottoman formation. They sense the panic rising in enemy ranks. And for the first time in months, something electric surges through them, hope, fierce and undeniable. They push from the walls, firing upon retreating Ottomans with newfound strength. A few brave souls even join the fray outside the city, their rage fueled by starvation, grief, and the desire for revenge. Back on the battlefield, the hussars wheel in formation, turning the initial impact into a sweeping arc that rips through Ottoman units attempting to regroup. They attack with a ferocity born of exhaustion, pride, and the knowledge that this moment defines everything: Poland, Europe, history itself. Horses slam into infantry lines with bone-cracking force. Swords rise and fall, flashing in the sun like silver lightning. And somewhere inside this storm of chaos, the truth crystallizes. The Ottoman army is breaking. Not everywhere at once, no great force like this collapses uniformly, but in patches, in pockets, in chains of failures that ripple outward. The right flank wavers, the center buckles, the reserves hesitate. The Janissaries fight with their customary discipline, but even they feel the weight of inevitability pressing down upon them. Kara Mustafa grips his staff so tightly his knuckles whiten. He issues orders, demanding a counterattack to push the cavalry back up the hill. But his commanders look at him with a mix of disbelief and fear. They know the truth even if he refuses to accept it. The hussars are unstoppable. They have too much momentum, too much force, too much resolve. He tries to command the Sipahis to charge the flank, but many of them are already engaged or dead. Others refuse to move, their horses trembling beneath them as the thunder from the hussars rolls closer. And deep down, beneath pride and ambition, Kara Mustafa feels the first true stirrings of panic. Not for the battle, for himself. Because defeat here means more than failure, it means the Sultan's wrath, swift and merciless. Sobieski plunges into the Ottoman camp, cutting down banners as he goes. His men follow, sweeping through tents, overturning supplies, scattering what remains of Ottoman organization. Smoke rises from burning canvas. The screams of the wounded mix with the roar of victorious cavalry. Sobieski drives deeper still, striking at the very heart of the siege. And with that, The battle begins to tip into something irreversible. The Ottomans break. Not as a unit, but as a chain snapping link by link. Soldiers drop shields, horses flee, tents collapse under the weight of bodies pushing to escape. What was moments ago the world's most formidable army begins to unravel under the sheer magnitude of the coalition's assault. The defenders atop Vienna's walls watch in stunned disbelief as the enemy that had tormented them for months suddenly dissolves into chaos. Some begin to cry, unable to process the rapid shift from certain death to miraculous salvation. Others shout oaths of victory into the smoke-filled air. And, as the hussars slice through the final pockets of resistance, Sobieski rides toward a rise overlooking the battlefield. He reins in his horse, breath ragged, armor splattered with dirt and smoke, and the remnants of shattered lances. He surveys the scene with the steady gaze of a man who understands the weight of what has been accomplished. Europe has been pulled back from the precipice. Vienna stands. The Ottoman advance has been stopped, not merely delayed, but shattered. Yet even in triumph, his eyes narrow. Kara Mustafa is nowhere to be seen in the chaos. Not yet. The smoke rolls low across the plains, thick enough to cling to the throat, heavy enough to blur the edges of victory and defeat into one trembling, uncertain haze. In the distance, the final echoes of musket fire fade beneath the rumble of fleeing footsteps. Horses snort and rear as their riders tug them into tighter formations. Pikes stand angled like rows of jagged teeth catching the dying light. And amidst all of this, amid the dust, the ruin, the shattered ranks, there is an eerie quiet settling through the battlefield. A quiet born not from peace, but from exhaustion so absolute that even triumph feels fragile. Sobieski sits on his horse at the crest of a small ridge, looking down upon the remnants of the Ottoman camp. The great sprawl of tents, once so ordered and intimidating, now lies in tatters. Many burn with soft, crackling flames. Others collapse as panicked soldiers race through them, trampling canvas and supplies in their desperation to escape. The sight is almost surreal. This was the might of an empire, an army famed across continents for its discipline, its ferocity, its relentless advance. And yet here it is, crumbling like dry clay beneath a rushing river. But victory, Sobieski knows, is never clean. He grips the reins tighter, feeling the tremor in his fingers, the weight of hours spent fighting through dust and smoke. His armor feels heavier now, soaked with sweat and streaked with soot. He breathes deeply, trying to steady himself, and in that breath he tastes blood not his own, but the metallic tang carried through the wind from the carnage below. It fills the air like a reminder. This triumph has been bought dearly. He scans the battlefield again, seeking signs of resistance. Pockets of Ottoman troops still fight along the edges of the camp, small, stubborn knots of men refusing to surrender even as the world collapses around them. Janissaries, mostly. Their discipline enduring even as their commanders flee. They form semicircular lines around their banners, defiant to the last, muskets flashing in desperate arcs. Coalition infantry tighten around them, slowly pressing forward with shields and bayonets. The struggle is brutal, close enough that screams pierce the backdrop of rumbling hooves. Sobieski watches for a moment, jaw tightening. He respects their courage. He has always respected courage, even in his enemies. But this is no longer a battle of equal wills. This is the end of something enormous, something years in the making, and it is ending beneath the force of his command. Still, one thought gnaws at him, sharper than any blade. Where is Kara Mustafa? The Grand Vizier has not appeared on the front lines, not among the fleeing soldiers, not near the broken artillery positions, not even near the command tents, many of which now lie abandoned or burning. Sobieski feels the unease coil deeper inside him. Leaders like Kara Mustafa do not vanish. They retreat. They plan. They rewrite disaster into opportunities. And if the Grand Vizier has found a way to slip through the chaos, then the consequences will stretch far beyond this battlefield. The Polish king turns to his officers, giving orders to tighten searches along the riverbanks, the forest edges, the rocky outcroppings that flank the camp. But even as he speaks, he sees the truth on their faces. They suspect the same thing he does. Kara Mustafa has fled. Meanwhile, within the collapsing Ottoman camp, the Grand Vizier moves through shadows, his robes muddied, his composure fractured but not entirely broken. He steps over fallen soldiers, his expression unreadable as he watches janissaries sacrifice themselves to buy time. Around him, officers shout frantic commands, trying to form some semblance of order from the roaring chaos. But the tide is against them, and they know it. Kara Mustafa hears the thunder of hooves drawing nearer, the roar of hussars advancing deeper into the camp. The ground shakes beneath him. His heart hammers. He closes his eyes for a single moment, breathing in the smoke, the dust, the bitter sting of a dream collapsing. He remembers the letters he had sent to the Sultan, boasting of imminent victory. Letters filled with promises of triumph, of glory, of a Vienna bowing before the crescent. Now those promises hang around his neck like stones. Failure is not an option the Empire forgives. He turns sharply and pushes deeper into the camp, slipping past burning tents, keeping to the narrow alleys formed by misplaced supplies. His guards stay close, eyes scanning for threats. They know their duty is no longer to the battle, it is to escape with the Vizier alive. He moves toward a cluster of horses being frantically saddled by a handful of loyal officers. Their hands shake as they work, but they obey without hesitation. They understand the stakes. They know what happens to commanders who fail. As Kara Mustafa mounts his horse, he looks back only once. The sight is unbearable, the Ottoman banners collapsing beneath the combined force of European allies, the mighty Janissary corps swallowed by smoke and steel. His vision blurs not with tears but with rage, a fury at the failure of others, at betrayal he imagines lurking in every shadow. He tells himself that he has not lost, that he will return, that the city would have fallen if not for the intervention of fate itself. But the truth presses in. No matter how he resists, everything he built here is burning. And so he rides. He slips through the outer fringes of the camp, using the chaos as cover. Coalition cavalry spot movement, give chase, but his guards repel them long enough for him to vanish into the forest. He rides hard, not daring to look back. On the ridge, Sobieski watches the fleeing figure disappear into the tree line. He knows, without confirmation, who it must be. But chasing him now would splinter his force, spread them thin, risk turning victory into confusion. The battle must be finished before any pursuit begins. And so he turns his attention back to the valley, where final pockets of resistance cling to life. Coalition soldiers sweep the camp, pushing inward from all directions. Bavarians set fire to ammunition stores to prevent recapture. Austrians reclaim cannon positions once used against their own city. Polish infantry flank retreating Ottomans, herding them into open ground where cavalry waits like wolves circling exhausted prey. The air fills with the crack of steel meeting wood, the howl of men trapped between defeat and death, the roar of victory growing in waves. And then, almost unexpectedly, the noise begins to dim. Bit by bit, the battlefield quiets. The last Janissary square, surrounded and outnumbered, finally breaks. Ottoman musicians drop their drums. Horses wander without riders. The fires burn lower as the fuel runs out. And into this strange, fading quiet, the sounds of victory seep like warm light through cracked stone. Coalition soldiers cheer. Others collapse onto the ground, too exhausted even to lift their voices. A few stand in stunned silence, staring at the battlefield as if unsure whether it is real. They had survived something colossal, something that generations yet unborn will speak about, argue about, mythologize. And Vienna erupts. The city's defenders rush from the gates, racing toward the armies that saved them. Some run with tears staining soot-blackened faces. Others shout with joy so raw it breaks the heart. They embrace soldiers they've never met, crying blessings, praises, thanks in a dozen languages. Church bells begin to ring, a sound muffled by smoke, but powerful enough to vibrate through the bones of every survivor. Sobieski enters the city not as a conqueror, but as a savior. He rides through the battered gates, flanked by his hussars. Civilians reach out to touch his armor, to brush the coat of his horse, to thank him for giving them back their world. He looks upon them with a mixture of pride and sorrow, pride in what has been achieved, sorrow for what they endured. Vienna's streets are lined with rubble, bodies, shattered homes. The smell of death mixes with the distant sweetness of burning grain. It is a victory, yes, but one carved into the flesh of the city itself. Yet even here, even in this moment of triumph, Sobieski's thoughts return to the escape he witnessed. Kara Mustafa lives, and as long as he lives, the threat is not extinguished, only delayed. But for today, Europe breathes again. Coalition leaders gather in what remains of the central square. They speak quietly at first, then with rising excitement as the scale of the victory becomes clear. The siege, which had lasted for months, has been broken in a single day. The world's largest cavalry charge has shattered the Ottoman war machine. And for the first time in a century, the Ottoman Empire has suffered a defeat so profound it shakes the foundations of its expansion westward. Sobieski lets them speak. He listens. But he knows the deeper truth beneath their celebrations. This was not just a battle. It was a turning point. A moment where the course of empires bent under the strain of men's decisions, men's fears, men's courage. And though histories are written in ink, the future born here is written in blood. He closes his eyes for a moment, letting the weight of the day settle. The cheers of Vienna fill the air. Bells ring. Soldiers laugh through their exhaustion. Yet beneath it all, a quieter truth hums. The world has changed, and nothing will ever be the same again. And, somewhere in the darkness beyond the forests, a defeated Grand Vizier rides alone into the night, carrying with him the burden of a shattered dream and the knowledge that his failure will demand a reckoning he cannot escape. Night creeps slowly across the battlefield, swallowing the fires, the broken tents, the splintered lances, until only the faint glow of embers marks where the greatest siege of the age finally died. The smoke softens into low, drifting clouds, and for the first time in months, a cool wind passes over Vienna without carrying the whistling arc of Ottoman artillery. It feels almost unreal, like the world has forgotten the rhythm of terror it lived under. The city exhales. The soldiers breathe easier. But beneath that collective relief, something heavier remains suspended in the air. Something unspoken. Sobieski rides through the camp once more, now transformed into a graveyard of shattered ambitions. Lanterns flicker along the makeshift paths carved through debris. Soldiers move slowly among the ruins, dragging aside bodies, gathering the wounded, checking for survivors who might yet breathe beneath collapsed canvas. The cries of the injured echo faintly, bouncing through the dark like ghosts refusing to leave the place where history cracked open. He reins in his horse near a pile of burned wagons. The faint outline of an Ottoman banner lies collapsed in the dirt, trampled, torn, the crescent scorched by fire. He stares at it for a moment, not with triumph, but with something closer to contemplation. It represents a force that nearly reshaped the continent, a power that had seemed unstoppable only days before. And now it is nothing more than fabric and ash. He swings from his saddle, boots sinking slightly into the churned mud. His legs ache with the dull, throbbing pain of overexertion. He has been fighting, riding, commanding for hours without pause. But he forces himself to keep moving. A king does not rest while the fate of his men still hangs in the balance. He walks through the remnants of the Ottoman command sector, noting the charred remains of tents once used by high-ranking officers. Maps lie scattered, ink smeared by the rain of earlier days. A silver coffee set glints amid the dirt, a strangely delicate remnant of the Grand Vizier's taste, untouched by the surrounding destruction. Sobieski bends, picks it up, turns it in his hands. It is cool, smooth, almost absurdly elegant for a battlefield. A reminder, perhaps, that empires fall not only through defeat but through arrogance. He sets it down gently and moves on. Behind him, the hussars sit in small clusters, some silent, others murmuring with awe at what they accomplished. Their wings, those iconic frames of wood and feathers, rest beside them, tattered, stained, broken in places. They laugh quietly, not out of joy, but from the raw relief of men who stared into the abyss and charged anyway. Some speak of flashes they saw during the charge, the glint of steel, the shapes of enemy soldiers scattered like leaves before a storm. Others confess the moments when fear nearly overtook them, when bullets whistled inches from their heads or when horses stumbled beneath the force of impact. Sobieski listens without interrupting. These stories matter. They are the heartbeat beneath the legend. Not far away, Austrian officers gather around a wounded soldier found crawling from beneath a broken supply cart. His face is grey with shock, his breath shallow. He grips one of them by the sleeve, whispering something too faint to hear. The officer leans closer, nods grimly, then turns to his companions and murmurs a truth that chills them all. A unit of Ottoman sappers had dug a tunnel beneath Vienna's northern wall, one primed with powder, one that would have detonated within hours if the siege had continued. Even victory, Sobieski realizes, arrived at the last possible moment. As he continues through the camp, he finds an abandoned journal half buried under dirt. The script is Ottoman, the ink smeared, but the dates remain readable. It is a soldier's reflections, notes on boredom, on hunger, on fear. A moment-by-moment record of the siege from the viewpoint of a man who believed he served the winning side. Sobieski traces one line with his thumb, the ink smudging faintly. We are told Vienna will fall soon. We have faith in our Vizier. But sometimes at night I hear the wind and it sounds like hoofbeats. He closes the journal gently. Somewhere in the dark, a Polish officer approaches, salutes, and reports that the final Ottoman pockets have surrendered or fled. The field is secure. The battle is over. Sobieski nods, but his eyes drift again toward the forest where Kara Mustafa vanished. Victory may belong to the coalition, but unfinished business casts a long shadow. He gives orders for patrols to tighten their lines, not because he fears a counterattack, but because fleeing commanders often become seeds of future campaigns. And this single man carries the weight of imperial expectation. A wounded empire can be dangerous. Meanwhile, Vienna comes alive. Torches flash across the city's ramparts as defenders celebrate with ragged cheers. Church bells ring through the night, their tones shaky at first, then growing stronger as more churches join in. Families pour into the streets, their faces tired yet glowing with gratitude. They embrace soldiers, offering whatever they can, water, bread, blessings whispered through trembling voices. Some fall to their knees, overcome by relief so powerful it unravels them completely. Sobieski rides toward the city gates once more. This time, his arrival is greeted with a tide of humanity. People reach out to touch him, tears streaming down faces lined by fear and starvation. They call him Deliverer, Savior, Lion of the West. But he shakes his head softly each time. He will take pride in victory, not worship. As he enters Vienna, he sees what the siege has truly done. Walls torn open as if clawed by giants, homes reduced to rubble, streets littered with the debris of months-long bombardment. The smell of smoke lingers in every corner. The people walk like survivors pulled from a wreckage they are still trying to comprehend. But amidst the ruins, he also sees something unmistakable: life returning. A spark rekindling. A young woman steps forward, holding the hand of a boy no older than 6. She lifts the child onto her shoulders, despite her clear exhaustion. The boy gazes at Sobieski with wide eyes, then whispers something into his mother's ear. She smiles through her tears and calls out to the king. He wants to know if you are the man with the wings. Sobieski's stern expression softens. He smiles a small, weary smile and gestures toward the forested ridge where the hussars rest. No, he replies gently. The men with wings are the ones who carried us all. The crowd murmurs with emotion. Later, as the night deepens and the fires burn low, coalition leaders gather for a final assessment. The Austrians speak of rebuilding. The Bavarians speak of the long march home. The Saxons propose strengthening fortifications. Yet beneath all these discussions lies a shared understanding. The Ottoman advance has been halted. Not by chance, not by luck, by unity fragile, unlikely, but powerful in its necessity. Still, Sobieski remains quiet during much of the council. His mind stays on the battlefield, on the faces of the fallen, on the path Kara Mustafa now travels. He knows the Grand Vizier's defeat will echo through the Ottoman Empire like a thunderbolt, that courts will whisper, rivals will circle, punishments will fall swiftly and brutally. Empires do not suffer humiliation lightly. When the meeting ends, Sobieski walks alone through the southern gate of Vienna. The wind has shifted, blowing the smoke eastward, as if carrying word of the defeat toward Constantinople. The stars emerge slowly overhead, scattered across the sky like embers drifting from a dying fire. He stands upon a ridge overlooking the plains where thousands fought and died mere hours before. The ground is scarred, pocked with craters, soaked with blood. Yet it feels peaceful now, as if the earth itself has exhaled. For a long moment, he closes his eyes and listens to the night, to the crackle of distant fires, to the faint rustle of banners swaying in the breeze, to the quiet hum of a city that survived.